Hello everyone, this is Gene. You may recall on my previous video where I said that not long after my first astral projection experience, I had a much more profound one where I met a family in the afterlife. So I'm going to describe and explain that experience now. Just before I do, I want to give a shout out to all 15 new patrons: John, Structured Somersault, Alice, Vanessa, Zoe, Karen, AJ, Shen, Alexandra, Asalia, I think that's how you say it, Brian, Joe, Muriel, Daya, and Daniel. So thank you all for joining the group. We've already had some really interesting discussions, dream interpretations, and insights, and everyone is clearly very interested in astral projection and spirituality. They have a lot of wisdom to share, and so it's clearly making for some very beneficial and friendly conversations in the Discord group. So I really appreciate that. And I also wanted to mention that Brian Haggerty in the group, he says that he tried the mantra that I revealed in my video where I talk about my simple method for astral projection. And he said that, it worked for him. He started having vibrations, but that he wasn't quite there yet. But he recommends, for everyone to give it a try. Brian is, I think, the third or fourth person to say this now. So if you've not heard that video yet, it's on the screen. Go and try it out. If you'd like to join a group of like-minded people and have access to the Astral Doorway Patreon and Discord, then simply become a patron. There's just one simple, cheap option for the membership. The details are in the description below. So let's get on to this experience. Like I said, it wasn't long after my first astral projection experience. I waited patiently for another experience after that, not worrying too much about when it will happen. And this was the first time I actually realized in a direct way that the astral plane was not just some place we go to during OBEs, but in fact, it is the place of the afterlife. A lot of people ask, what is the afterlife? Well, it is basically the astral plane, but there is more to it. It doesn't just have to be the astral plane, but I'll make a separate video on the mechanics of death, afterlife, where we go to after death. Is it just the astral plane? Can we just connect back with, Source, with God? Do we go to heaven and hell? What about other planes, such as the mental plane? We'll get into all of that. But for now, let me tell you this experience. So, I woke up in the middle of the night after just a normal night's sleep. Out of habit, which I got into this habit of, waking up in the middle of the night, I woke up in the middle of my sleep and I focused on falling back to sleep with full waking awareness. And as I went to sleep, I heard unusual sounds present themselves, the normal crazy sounds that everyone hears that you don't have to think too much into or get nervous or anxious about. It involves things like loud banging, vibrating, and it can even involve people speaking. Now, my physical eyes opened involuntarily, and the sounds would go, and I would close my eyes again, and they would return. So it's very important to be physically relaxed during this phase and let these sort of sounds come in. You can see it as a sort of radio tuning into these other dimensions. So, whatever you hear on the way when you're lying in bed and you hear voices and stuff, you don't need to make a narrative over them. You don't need to make a story in your head. You don't need to react to them. Just let the sounds play out. It doesn't matter what they're saying to you. You know, if you're reacting and you think a voice is telling you the signs of God, then you're probably not going to advance beyond that phase. You need to just calmly, passively, impartially let all those sounds and visuals keep passing by you and keep growing in your extrasensory perception. But at the same time, it's a subtle art, right? Because if I focus my attention on them too much, they would also disappear. So I let them be naturally. And naturally, they seem to develop in intensity until they had consumed my full awareness. So, in the same way, a convulsion, a deep feeling emanated from my stomach and it started to engulf my body. I began to vibrate intensely, whilst also sort of feeling this sensation of falling or flying. It's always an intense energy. So it's important to make sure that you let it be, surrender to it. Don't try to control it too much and don't resist the feeling. Amongst all this, hypnagogic colors swirl into your vision. That's what I could see. And they seem to be struggling to form an image. And as I focused onto these swirling colors, I found myself merging into a scene. Those colors would start to magically form into this scene as if it was a art canvas with lots of different colors and paints start to merge and go into this detailed scene. And I pushed myself into the art canvas, so to speak. And I really felt myself come out of my body and into this scene, into this art canvas. And as I did, I felt kind of groggy, as if I'd just woken up. Just remember the whole phase of separating into astral projection is not a fully aware, fully sober experience. You pass through the stage of sleep, you pass through this sort of trance, you're very sleepy and sort of drunk, and all this extrasensory perceptions are happening, and then, pop, you come out into the other side conscious, but also, you need to get your bearings a bit like you've just woken up. So I found myself in this scene, and I was already sitting in a meditative lotus position in the middle of a stairway. If you imagine movie scenes where the character is trying to escape a building and they take the fire exit, right? And they're walking down this small cement staircase. Well, I was in just one of those levels of a staircase in a tall building. And it was very grey and dull, but sitting next to me in the same position was a man that I didn't recognize. He felt familiar. It felt like I had already been sitting next to him for a while, as if I had just become conscious in the middle of the dream, which was strange because, of course, just before this, I was awake. So who knows? Part of my consciousness may have already been here. Consciousness is multidimensional after all. But yes, I recognized him as someone I knew, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. We were speaking to each other, but I can't remember the whole experience. As I said, I felt kind of groggy, but I do remember the last part of the conversation. And he said, "We will go up the stairs together." Now, he said this in a sort of cryptic way, and I knew he didn't mean as in like actually walk up the stairs. A woman was also in front of us. She was standing right in front of us. I didn't realize that she was there. And she said abruptly, we would expect you to go higher. Now, before having time to actually analyze her fully, two spheres, which were vertically connected by a bar or a cord in between, appeared above her head. I made a little picture because it's a bit hard to explain, so you can see it on the screen. I just made this quickly in Photoshop. And each sphere had a image inside. And since she said, we expect you to go higher, and the man was also basically telling me to metaphorically go up these stairs, I focused on the top image. And as I did, I began again, just like going into that art canvas, I zoomed into the top sphere above her head. And as I did, the scene of this stairway began to fade. This was unintentional, so I had a moment of apprehension. I didn't want to wake up and ruin what was happening. So, for an instant, I held onto the man's arm to try to stay grounded, but I soon found myself back in my bed. And I realized that I shouldn't have held onto his arm. I shouldn't have resisted what was happening. Whenever there's an energetic shift like this, we should just surrender to what's happening. I should have just gone into that sphere. But anyway, I was back in my bed and I reflected a bit. Of course, I realized that they were metaphorically telling me to go higher in dimensions or higher in my consciousness. So, I got back into a sort of Zen state and quickly relaxed and fell asleep again. So, soon after falling asleep, I found myself in what seemed to be a dream. I wasn't fully conscious, and I was standing in an outdoor car park, which was only about 100 feet from where I was sleeping. So this was, just basically outside my house. Um, just outside my house, there was these block of offices with a large car park space, and I was standing in the middle of it. And in this sort of unconscious, dreamlike state, I found myself gazing into the sky, and I had an immense feeling of awe as I stared at one of the most beautiful, multicolored masses of cloud I'd ever seen. I always enjoy the feeling and sense of marvel when you look at something in a dream or the astral that you can't ever see in waking physical life, right? If you're ever in a lucid dream or astral, I urge you to just look at the sky. You will usually see something very interesting. And it can often lead to lucidity and deeper dimensions of awareness. And in this dream, I saw these huge clouds, and they were all multicolored. It was amazing to see. I can see it so vividly still in my mind. And amongst these big, beautiful, multicolored clouds, I could see what I could only describe as a UFO. It was black, but it was also shaped like the two spheres connected by a cord, like I had just seen in my previous experience. So it seems like my subconscious was still trying to lead me to a full astral projection experience. A lot of people talk to me about their frustration with trying to attempt astral projection experiences. And they tell me that, oh, I'm really frustrated because I keep just having lucid dreams, or I keep having dreams that I'm astral projecting. These are actually all good signs. Lucid dreaming is not something we should be avoiding on the path. Lucid dreams are important to connect with our own dream worlds, and we shouldn't be trying to get rid of them. We should be instead trying to integrate with them and take advantage of them, right? And this experience that I was having is a good example of this in between state between dreams and astral projection. And you can see how that symbol was sort of coming into my dream. And as you'll see, it shifts me into a full astral projection experience. So, as I was looking at this sort of UFO, but kind of subconscious projection of the symbol that I saw in my last experience, I stared at it for about 10 seconds and then suddenly, quickly, it flew to the left of the entire sky and it came in and out of these beautiful clouds that I saw. And behind it, as it soared through the sky, the back side of it let out the most breathtaking sight. It let out these floods of enormous multicolored clouds that filled the entire sky in seconds. It was like a supervolcano erupting sideways. The clouds began to also pulsate dramatically with giant orbs of colors coming out from them, as if you were looking at lightning that's inside clouds, but they were also pulsating and all these colors happening. So, as you can imagine, even though I was unconscious in this dream, the sort of shock and the sort of awe that was arising in me was spurring on lucidity in me. It was giving shocks to my consciousness. And then I heard the cracking of thunder, and there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. I felt an unnerving feeling from the pit of my stomach. It made me take a step back, but as I took a step back, I hit the brick wall of the block of offices of the building behind me. I didn't realize it was there, and I just scurried into a corner out of an insecure impulse. And I saw the UFO descend and fly and crash into the distance and exploded. And I saw a sort of nuclear bomb go off in the distance. So, out of all this fear, I got my phone out. Of course, not a real phone, it's just an unconscious dream projection. I got my phone out to call a relative in fear that I would die, tell them that I love them. But as I did, something in me woke up and thankfully realized that this was a dream. So I did the hold nose reality check. I realized it was a dream and I just got a full control and a grip over myself and woke my consciousness up. And as I realized that this was a dream, I sort of also realized that this wasn't just entirely a dream, and I was in a sort of non physical dimension of sorts. So, as I composed myself, I looked at my hands and attempted to attain full waking consciousness. And as I did, my mind began to gain clarity, and I witnessed all my subconscious dream projections dissolve before my eyes. So I saw brick walls, trees, fences, and all those multicolored clouds all just begin to disappear. They dissolved, vanished as my mind gained clarity. But the interesting thing was that I was still in the same location near where I was sleeping, and I was in this car park next to the same block of offices, but now my consciousness was completely different. A lot of people ask, how do you tell the difference between a dream and an astral projection experience? I do my best to try and describe all the ins and outs and little mechanics, such as you can't control the environment. But when it really comes to it, you can just tell the difference because it feels completely different. And as you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, but you're in the same location. How can you tell it's different? Well, before, my consciousness was asleep, and now my consciousness was fully awake. And there is an innate instinctive feeling that through realizing I was in a dreamlike state, I was subconsciously projecting all sorts of unconscious things, such as the phone in my hand, the symbol in the sky that crashed and made a nuclear bomb, which was, kind of ridiculous, really, if you think about it. And that when you fully attain full waking awareness and you also practice meditation in your waking life, you understand how to stop dreaming and just be aware of your environment. And so here I was, fully aware, fully awake in this astral plane. If you want to understand how this is possible, I made two videos that I recommend. They're called Lucid Dreaming versus Astral Projection, and also Shared Dreams and Non-Shared Astral Projection. If you listen to those two videos, you'll start to understand where I'm coming from. And part of those episodes explain how actually dreams can often be us unconsciously roaming around in the astral. And that's exactly what I was doing here, right? I was actually in an astral plane. I was actually connected to this non physical counterpart of the physical plane, but I was unconscious. I was dreaming. Now, this doesn't happen all the time in our dreams. Usually, we conjure up an entire dream world, right? So, I mean, we may be in the astral plane, but we're clouded by, we're in this, our own orb, our own sphere of just a complete dream world, which we conjure up. But obviously, because I was practicing astral projection, trying to wake up my consciousness, I wasn't just in a full dream world. I was just projecting a few objects and imaginations and hallucinations here and there. So, back to the experience. I just wanted to clarify what was really happening there. And so, back to the experience where I had full waking consciousness in this astral plane, which I could feel right from the energy and the physicality of it, where my perception was crisp, awake, untainted. And I walked towards the main road in the front of the building of offices. And I looked around my neighborhood. This main road was usually not that busy. And I just looked around. It was a perfect replica of the physical version of where I always come out of when I walk outside of my house. I could see the shop that I always go to. I could see restaurants. The road was just completely the same, down to lampposts, different shops, the way the road was, even just the markings on the roads, little patches of grass that are always there in the physical, trees. It was exactly the same. The only two things that were different on this astral counterpart of Earth was the vast number of people out on the street. There was a lot of people. And what was also unfamiliar was this overly friendly community atmosphere that I sense from them. Usually people just walk across this street unconscious. Nobody talks to each other. Everyone's just going about their business, right? But here it seemed that nobody had preoccupations. Everybody had a sense of joy or purpose. Everyone was actively doing something. They were there for the purpose of being there, right? No one was really going somewhere, so to speak. They were enjoying themselves. Is something that, I'd never see in the physical. So I immediately sensed that even though I was in a physical replica of my local location, this was different. When you come out of the astral, you can go to all sorts of dimensions, all right? But when your consciousness is very objective and set to the same level or frequency of the physical Earth-like plane, you can go to these very similar locations. Now, I wasn't looking at physical people in this physical location because also what was unfamiliar, what was different, was the sky. It had this purple dusk in the sky. It was very magical. So that kind of said to me that this was a physical counterpart, but the whole atmosphere of this place was a bit more magical. there was something more special and enlightened about this counterpart of this location. And just to add, quantum physics at the moment is talking all sorts of things about parallel worlds. If only they knew they could access parallel worlds just like this that are at an arm's reach within our consciousness. And this isn't just some hallucination or imagination of the mind. When you experience something like this firsthand, the reality of it hits you profoundly, and it's indescribable how tangible and physical and real it all feels, especially compared to our dense physical world, which in reality, the physical world can often feel dreamlike. And so I approached the pavement with all these crowds of lively people walking by me. I could hear all their enthusiastic and friendly conversation pouring into my ears. As I started to walk more, I became surprised because it became a challenge. I had to strain myself into a conscious and meditative walk. It was like trying to walk for the first time as if I had new legs. I was laughing at myself at what I must have looked like to others. This is a common occurrence when we first start astral projecting and trying to get a conscious grip over our astral bodies. But as I focused and strained a bit, I got a hang of it and felt a bit more stronger. And as I got into this meditative walk, I started to feel even more alive, blisteringly alive. And I walked along this pavement with all these people in just pure joy and awe. I walk across this same road all the time in the physical, but to experience it like this, in this enchanted and lively way, was such a joy to experience. I had to make a conscious effort to contain myself, not to be too fascinated about what was happening. And so I remembered my intent for astral projection and out of body experiences, to understand the world that exists beyond the physical. And so I contemplated the lives of the people that I saw around me. I saw many cheerful friends and family walking past me, and I put my hand out at one of them just to stop them and greet them. They were all very friendly. I said hello, my name is Jean, and I just smiled and waved. And they were a Middle Eastern family of five. They looked either Arabian, North African, or maybe Indian. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was a family of five: a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, and a grandfather who was in a wheelchair. And he instantly threw me into confusion because it was a non physical world, right? This was the astral plane. And he chose to travel around in a wheelchair. I wouldn't usually be surprised if I sensed that this world was an unconscious, dream-like world where people are unconscious. The level of energy, I just knew that people were conscious like me. And they were a beautiful family. They had a lovely aura, a lovely energy about them, very happy and joyful. It was just a joy to be in their presence. And there was a lot of information communicated through that subtle, joyful energy that they were emanating. And a question just came out of me. And I guess it came from my intuitive sense that this just was the afterlife. I knew that these weren't people unconsciously projecting out of their bodies. And I also knew that this wasn't a physical counterpart of the physical real time plane of, seeing and witnessing actual physical people in waking life, right? So there was only one other possibility, and that this was the afterlife. And yes, this question just came out with me. I asked them, so do you know that you're all dead? And they were all just grinning. And they said yes, but they were all grinning, and it seemed that they could see through me, right? They could read me. And I said, okay, sorry. I was just curious. I'm alive, and I was going to explain that I'm an astral projector in physical life, but they interrupted me. And one of them said, yes, we know. They were all just knowingly looking at me and nodding with a sense of recognition. I wondered how they knew. I wondered about the silver cord that I'd read so much about. I did look down at that point at my body, at my abdomen. I didn't see a silver cord, but I did feel a kind of emanating vibration in my abdomen area. So I don't know, maybe that's how they could tell. Or it was just through normal astral telepathy. So I was just in amazement, right? They weren't just conscious of their own death, but they also somehow knew that I was astral projecting and that my physical body was asleep in the physical world. I also remember still thinking about the grandfather in the wheelchair, and there was a sort of telepathic interchange there. And basically, what the interchange was that they recognized, or they knew what I was thinking, and the grandfather was kind of, you could say, face palming himself. This is, I'm trying to translate what was happening in astral telepathic terms, right? There's a communication in the astral where you don't need to say words in English, so to speak. There's just a knowing between people. And yes, he was like rolling his eyes at me, um, but also laughing at the same time that he didn't get it. And the rest of the family members were laughing at my idiocy, so to speak. And somewhere in me started to understand that, he was in a wheelchair for a reason. And I'll explain at the end what I think this family were doing. So I clearly bored them and they wanted to get back to their business. So most of them continued walking. But the son stayed with me. I think he was in his late teens. And he stayed with me for a few minutes and told me about his family. But I can't recall most of the conversation since, this was one of my first significant astral projection experiences. But I do remember the last part. And I remember asking him, were you all happy to know that you could still spend time together after you died? He said yes to me, nodding his head, but he was half uninterested as he spotted his family in the distance walking away from us. And so he left me to catch up with his family. And at that point, I started to notice that I was losing feeling on the left side of my face for some reason. I was just stood on this pavement still with a lot of people walking past me. And I felt the numbness of my face with my hand. I tried to speak, but to my amazement, I could only utter gibberish. So, as I said, I was very new to all this. And it seemed that my abilities were coming to its limits. And as I struggled to stay in that dimension, all of a sudden, I was back in my bed. And I just laid in bed and reflected in awe at what I had just experienced. All those people were in an afterlife that was extremely similar to our physical earthly lives, in an environment that was exactly the same as the physical. So, my analysis and intuition of this was that the family I met were purposely with each other to fulfill their purpose and intentions of experiencing family life together, which they may have missed out on in the physical world for whatever reason, right? We're always so busy in physical life, and we have this innate feeling, to spend time with our family, review our physical life with them. But I also sense that maybe one or more of those family members died unexpectedly. And this sense of wanting to spend time with your family in the afterlife is also made even stronger for that reason. One of the children were pushing the grandpa. So, in physical life, maybe one of the children regretted the fact that they couldn't look after their grandfather at the end stages of his life. So he chose to be in a wheelchair so that the children could push him around and they could experience the whole purpose behind looking after their elder family member. So, yes, in conclusion, they were simply experiencing family time together that they missed out on the physical world. So, this is just a glimpse of the type of information and wisdom we can find out in the astral plane. Intimate communication with those who are living out their personal journeys, their soul's journey into the afterlife. Things don't just stop when we die. I think for most of our soul's situation, I think it's unrealistic to think that, oh, life just finishes, right? A lot of people think that they're taking a scientific or objective perspective in assuming that, oh, yeah, there's nothing after the physical life. There's even Buddhists who say that, maybe there is no afterlife. Well, to me, I would say that, look, if you want to be more objective about it and you really understand how energy works, it's way more rational to assume there is an afterlife, because how can your energy just stop, right? We have our attachments and entanglements with the physical world. For example, think of a suicide bomber who kills himself and others in the process of his death. He's going to have some hard, energetic lessons to learn. He's not just going to vanish into thin air. No. Our actions have energetic consequences that we will have to face, right? The illusion that nothing happens and nothing matters is the biggest lie of our species. As we go about our life, the deeds throughout our life, and the connections that we make with people, whether good or bad, right? Whether it's positive or negative, or filled with strong emotions, especially, we have to deal with those energies. There is a process before any sort of integration or moving on. We have to realize and learn from and review our life. Even physics says energy can't be destroyed or recreated, it just transforms. And you can't just think of that in terms of our essence or soul, right? Because as I've been talking about on this channel, our consciousness is multidimensional, and parts of our energy are here and there in thinking about other people, in our dreams, our desires. And so the afterlife is still a continuation of all those things that our consciousness projects and connects to. And so, yeah, don't assume that nothing is going to happen after your death. In fact, assume quite the opposite, that we will have to take a good look at our energetic attachments and feelings about the world and our connection with others. Things that we took for granted in life, things that we did, things that we didn't do, right? Because I'm going into the realms of karma now, right? The Wheel of Samsara. I'll leave some links in the description for that if you want to do some further reading, right? And we pay karma for not just what we do, but also for what we don't do, right? There's a lot of things in our life that we should have done, that we ignored because we weren't fully conscious of what we were supposed to do. So I can get into all of that on future videos. I know this went on a bit longer, but I hope you appreciate my accounts and explanations of my experience. So please be subscribed for more videos like this and similar topics, click the bell button to know when I upload a new video, and I will see you on the next episode.